same.
Start gangbanging. Start teaching myself how to be a man. I mean, I guess that's what made it. And you start losing people that are close to you from a young age, and that's when shit starts changing. Start going back into the streets. Start doing drugs, smoking weed, struggling with bills, struggling with money, clothes, school. So then you gotta fall back into drug dealing. You know, I trip out because we didn't do that shit because it was cool or whatever. You know, kids nowadays, they just do it because they think it's cool. Shit, I was really slinging so I could buy a new t-shirt. Slinging so I could have my phone bill paid. You know, slang so I could have a little strap just in case this motherfucker's trying to jump, just trying to jump.
No. Ah. What do you guys want to watch? You tell me. Screaming into the void. Is it structured?
Hey y'all, Dixie here.
Good.
I recently shared
I'll
a
watch it.
post on my social media accounts asking folks if they had any questions about my Mount Kilimanjaro trip to share them there in the comments. That way I could compile a big informational video and answer all of those questions. So today, that's what I'd like to do. If you want to skip around to different sections, there are timestamps in the video description. So let's get started with those questions. First, which route should I take? There are multiple routes to take up to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, but there are a few things to consider when trying to pick which one of them is right for you. First, you should keep in mind that the longer routes are going to cost a little bit more money than the shorter mounts. And that's because you've got supplies to feed you for more days, so that makes sense. But on the other side of that, the longer routes and being on the mountain more days allows your body to acclimate better, and therefore you give yourself the best chance at a successful summit. Also, with the longer routes, you get to see more of the mountain. I really enjoyed spending time in the forest, and we were able to camp there one night because I took a longer route. So I got to hear monkeys serenading us at night and capture my first antelope on the game camera. Just a little side note here, when you're looking at the number of days that a particular route is, keep in mind that a lot of these guide companies include the day before you start your trek and the day after you get off the mountain as part of the trip, because typically they cover the lodging for the day before your trek and the night that you get off the mountain. So for me, I took the Lemosho 10-day route, but that's actually only 8 days on the mountain. Are you required to go with a guide company? And if so, how do you choose one? Yes, by law, you are required to summit Mount Kilimanjaro with a guide company who is a licensed operator. Some of the things you might consider when selecting a company is the cost of the package. Of course, price for most people plays into the decision. Also, does the company you're booking with offer the type of tour that you want? That could be a private tour or a group tour. Also, what is included in the package for the particular cost? Does that come with a private toilet tent?
It's Africa.
Is there going to be good food or just getting by food? And are those things even important to you? Something that I definitely looked into was the climbing success rate. Is the company I'm booking with able to get their people to the top within safety parameters? The location of the guide company that you're booking with might be important to you. I went with Peak Planet. They're located here in the US, and that's just what made me comfortable for my first go round of booking a trip like this. If you book with a company in your home country, you're probably going to pay a little bit more than if you book with a guide company right in Tanzania. Because there are a lot of scammers out there, you definitely want to check out reviews to make sure the company you're working with is a bona fide actual
bona fide.
Something that I didn't consider when I planned my trip, and I definitely would going forward now that I have a little bit more knowledge, is the treatment of the porters. And I can definitely say with confidence that the porters I talked with have respect.
They were bona fide. That's what I can tell you.
When a lot of people were just out of luck during COVID, Peak Planet made sure their guys were still taken care of. Somebody asked how many porters and guides were in my group.
Your group? My group?
And there were a total of guides and porters together, 27 people supporting us. What does this
for how many
trip
people
cost? I did a full video of the cost breakdown, including every little cent along the way. So I'll put a link to that in the video description. But for my package through Peak Planet, it costs $2,899 plus $480 in tips. Tips are something that's decided on by the group at the end of the trip based on the service that was provided to us by
all right, you new viewers, make sure you're following now.
Give certain people a little bit extra, you're certainly able to do that. But Peak Planet provided us with a typical range of what the porters expect to make.
We're just watching some
but make
vids,
sure
get some
that
fuel.
You've got cash with you, whether that's in US dollars, euros, or you get Tanzanian shillings while you're there. But you need to have cash so that when you get back to the hotel, you can combine everything together with your group and hand it over to the guides. What all is provided in one of these guiding packages?
6 minutes.
Of course, I
all
can't
right.
speak for every company, but for Peak Planet, the cost of our trip paid for the national park fees, transportation to and from the airport to the lodge that we stayed at, 2 nights lodging with free breakfast included in that stay, transportation from the lodge to the mountain and from the mountain back to the lodge, use of a 4-season tent, a foam sleeping pad, a mess tent and chairs, all of the kitchen gear like utensils, cups, plates, bowls, etc. Morning service of coffee or tea delivered to the tent with a wake-up call. 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then snacks and hot drinks after we got to camp. All of the water that we used during our trek, and also
I haven't tried the
warm
VLF
water provided to
in
you
Paris.
at your
Let's see.
tent to kind of wash up with in the evenings and in the
could be
mornings.
okay.
Also, they
I mean, the
fetched water
Vanda,
for us
who would have
because it
known the
wasn't
Vanda's
just
the best track in
beautifully and
Paris.
easily flowing right there through the camp. A
Hundreds and
private
hundreds of
toilet tent
races.
came with the package from Peak Planet.
Oh,
but
look, a pooper.
I know a lot of companies, that's something that's an add-on. The porters carried a duffel bag, including all of the things that I wouldn't use during the day, like my sleeping bag, extra layers of clothes, toiletries, etc. There's also health monitoring included in this trip. Every evening, the guides do a health check where they take your blood pressure, temperature, they have a little pulse.
I mean,
oximeter
Kilimanjaro
to
is
see
like
your heart rate
8,000
and
feet,
oxygen
man.
levels.
I mean, it's
They
not
ask
like
questions like, how are
Dixie
you
can
feeling
handle
on a
that.
scale from 1 to 10? And what does your pee look like? Is it clear?
Echo,
or
how
cloudy?
tall is
Just so you know,
Kilimanjaro?
as far as the health checks go, it's more in how you feel. It's not like you can have a
whatever.
certain number
19,000
that they're
feet's
going to
fine.
kick you off the mountain or tell you, you can't summit. It's really on you and how you're feeling, because my heart rate
That's not the
stayed
death zone.
elevated above normal range the entire time we were there, and I had the highest heart rate of the group. So I was a little worried, like, oh man, maybe they're gonna make me leave if it reaches a certain point. But again, the main focus was
You
how
have
feel.
undiagnosed
Sometimes the
hypertension,
numbers
then,
can be
lady.
off when you're at higher elevations, but you're still fine. What do I need to bring as far as gear goes? Basically everything that I didn't name in the what's included. This again may vary from guide company to guide company, so I'm sure that your company you book with is going to provide you a list just like Peak Planet did. And something else that I appreciated about Peak Planet is we had a little sit-down powwow briefing the night before we started our trek, and then they came to our rooms and did a gear shakedown with us to make
Thanks
sure
for
that
the
we were
follow,
comfortable with everything.
Tannis.
Most of these
Tammy.
companies also have gear
Sorry.
that you can rent, and so instead
I have
of
terrible
going out
vision.
and buying a bunch of gear that maybe you'll never use again in the future, that may be one way to reduce your costs. But I've got a very in-depth video where I talk about all of the gear that I carried, and I've got links to all
I don't
the
like
items.
that one.
So I'll put a link to
Let
that
us
video in the description.
try
What am I
something
expected
else.
to carry in my pack?
The GT2
During the
is
day,
fine.
you
I
have
guess.
just the basic stuff that you would need: sunscreen, chapstick, extra layers, water, snacks. But even if you're not able to carry a day pack because of some weight limits or anything like that, or if you just don't want to, one of the girls in our group actually had a private porter who walked with her and carried her day pack. So
Weird.
for anybody who needs or wants that option, through Peak Planet, that option exists. So I assume through other companies it does.
I
as
mean,
well, for an extra cost.
Kilimanjaro, like
What
how
kind
far
of food
south
were
is
you
that?
served? Again, this will vary from company to company, but we were always provided with a meat, a starch, a vegetable, and most of the time some fruit. I really appreciated how a lot of times we were given soup also, because you get so sick of chugging water, so that was just an additional way to hydrate that didn't make you feel like you were gonna puke from drinking too much water. I have to say, with Peak Planet, the food was really good and was better than I expected. What if somebody has dietary restrictions? Peak Planet was willing to work with their climbers on different dietary restrictions. I saw several people get served slightly different varieties of what the rest of us were having because of their preferences or needs. So this might be another limiting factor to help you decide on what company to go with. The next question is, can you climb Mount Kilimanjaro without porters to save money? While it is recommended to go with porters so that you can increase your chances of a successful summit by having to
That was
exert
just
your body
dumb.
less as you're
Should have
acclimating to these
steered that a
higher
little
elevations,
easier.
it's certainly not required. And there are, in fact, companies who have pared down guided trips. One of these companies that I read about online is Kilimanjaro Experts. Obviously, I don't have any personal experience with them,
All
but
right.
I did
Hurry.
read some write-ups on
There we
people
go.
who went on trips with this company. They offer what is called
I already
an
used my,
Ironman type package where
cancel
you
ansel.
are essentially responsible for yourself.
So at least I get
carrying
6 out of 8.
all of your gear, collecting your water, cooking your food, and you just have essentially a guide with you. This company has listed on their website, though, if you're doing this type of trip just to save money, then you might not actually save as much as you'd
Exactly.
hope, because actually the porter's
But I mean, how many
salary is
you could
not a
have stayed
significant
in
portion
Tanzania?
of what you pay when you pay
Right,
for
you
a
could have
guided
stayed
trip.
there
In
for
fact, the
like
park fees
weeks
are pretty
and found
steep,
somebody
and
that
is
will
a
help you up that
significant
mountain
chunk of
for like a
actually
couple of
going on
$100
these
bucks.
trips. They give
Instead
some
of,
rough cost
you know.
estimates on their
All right,
website, and
whatever, Dixie.
so just
You
for
know, you're
example,
trying to travel
for
a
an
lap of
Ironman
luxury
guided
as a
trip
vegan or
for a
whatever
group
you've done to
of
yourself,
four trekkers for 8 days,
which is
the
frustrating to
approximate
me
cost
because,
per person is $1,883.
you know what? Let's look here, just so you guys see. So let's look at her. Let's try her like PCT, right? Like this Gore-Tex video. No,
Hey
that's
y'all,
3 years
Dixie here.
ago.
Today I want to talk to you about why I don't fool with Gore-Tex trail runners.
Spot here.
Hey y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to talk
She
to you
looks
about
so much
5
healthier,
common
right?
mistakes that
Doesn't she?
beginning backpackers often make.
That's my personal opinion. You
Now,
guys
I'm not
can,
knocking the
chime in
beginners, but
anytime.
any professional just wasn't born a professional, right? I mean, Michael Jordan didn't pop out of the womb, start taking his first steps while perfectly dribbling a basketball. It takes time to learn things, and that's normal. But I'm hoping that maybe this video will help some of the beginners to learn from the mistakes of others, and I'm willing to bet even some of you experienced backpackers who are watching can admit to probably making one or more of these mistakes yourself. For this video, I took some input from my fellow backpackers, and I also considered my own mistakes. So let's get started. Mistake number 1 is packing everything but the kitchen sink. Before I started my AT thru hike, I did a lot of research about what gear is actually necessary and, you know, common mistakes, and probably the top one was packing way too much stuff. Now this might be like extra gear or just like unnecessary items completely. There's nothing wrong with having luxury items. You know, I think that most backpackers, except maybe like the serious
The
ultralighters,
serious
probably,
guys,
you know,
right?
have
Exactly.
some kind of luxury item. But
I have
taking
many.
things like a hatchet, an axe, extra boots, several changes of clothes, like not just like a cold and, you know, warm outfit, but like literally
I
almost
get.
a change of clothes for
All right.
7 days or something. Or a
Dixie,
family photo
not
album.
fun.
Those things are a little
where
excessive, but
was
they are
my-
things that people have done. Maybe
Where
some
was I-
things that
what was I
seem
watching?
like you might need them, but are still a little excessive, are like extra batteries, and I'm not talking about like one set of extra batteries, but like several. Also extra
Something with
headlamps and
Doug.
things like that.
What's
Those
that?
are all things that you can get by if something happens to you for a few days. You know, even on a through hike, on the AT and the PCT, you're not going to be out in the wilderness for probably more than 7 days at most. I mean, there might be a section that'll be a little bit longer, but most of the time though, you're looking at like 3 to 7 days. Some people take extra filters, you know, in case theirs fails. And again, while it sounds like it makes sense, if you're cooking, you can always boil your water as a backup. So you want to make sure that you only take the true things that are necessities, and, you know, hopefully they have some kind of multi-purpose. And if you really put your mind to it and think,
This
This is a
Is a
Vector
W8.
and it is quite simply the single craziest
Craziest
supercar
vehicle
ever.
produced. And I'm going to show you and take it out on a road and drive it.
made.
I'm Doug
That's a
DeMuro.
bold claim because
There was like
are a
10 of these made ever. These W8s. Look at how fat this tire is, by the way.
Lot of
What
crazy
is going on here?
supercars,
All right, I'm gonna
but
stop
this one wins the all-time craziest. Today, I'm going to review the Vector W8 and explain why. Beep, boop. I've borrowed this Vector from a viewer here in New Jersey, which is no
I'll be right
easy
back.
feat because
Refill.
Vector only made about 20 of these during this car's production run from the late 1980s to the early 1990s. Now, despite its rarity, most car enthusiasts know about the Vector, mostly because of its absolutely ridiculous styling, which I truly believe is the most insane styling of any car ever to reach production in the entire history of the car industry. But the insanity of this car's styling is only part of the craziness of this car. The W8 used a 6-liter V8 that was a modified version of the Chevy Corvette's V8 from the time, but then it was twin turbocharged for 625 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. For reference, the Lamborghini Countach of this era was only making about 450 horsepower. Now, interestingly, Vector mated this monster engine to a General Motors 3-speed Hydra-Matic automatic transmission that had also been used in motorhomes and RVs in the 1970s. I'm not kidding. Then there was the company itself. Vector wasn't supposed to be an automotive company, but instead rather an aeromotive company, because founder Jerry Weigert wanted the car to be sort of a fusing of automobile and jet airplane. And I don't just mean that in terms of styling. There's more to it than that. You'll see what I mean in a few minutes. Weigert also wanted Vector to be sort of the American supercar, America's answer to Ferrari and Lamborghini, but Vector always struggled to be a viable company. As an example, the M12, which was built after this, the successor to the W8, used a Lamborghini V12, but Vector had trouble paying Lamborghini for the engines, and so at one point, Vector actually offered one of these to Lamborghini as payment for M12 engines, which Lamborghini accepted. There was also a hostile takeover attempt of Vector from a company in Indonesia, which Jerry Weigert successfully sued to stop from happening. But back to the W8. Now, at the time this car came out, Vector said it would do 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, and it could hit a top speed of 240 miles per hour. But magazine tests from the time said 0 to 60 was more like 4.2 seconds, and the top speed was probably around 210 to 220 miles per hour. Now, that's still an incredible figure, and it would have made this the fastest production car in the world at the time it was on sale, but nobody ever tested it. Now, the sticker price when this car was tested by magazines 30 years ago was around $285,000, which translates to about $600,000 in today's money. And yes, Vector only made 20 of these for the entire world, which makes this one of the rarest cars I have ever tested. And today, I'm going to review it. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the W8, and I'm going to show you all of its many quirks and features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the W8, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of some other crazy 1980s sports cars currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Vector W8 with getting inside of it, and that means starting with the key. I love this because take a look at the key. It's just a regular 1980s General Motors key. The Vector W8 used a modified General Motors engine, so it makes sense it shares a key with GM vehicles, but I love that this is basically the same key blank you would have for a Chevy Cavalier or a Buick Skylark from this era. If you have a Vector W8 and you need to get a key copy made, head on down to Home Depot. They'll do it for you there for like $3, and then you can get into your 1 of 20 supercar. But anyway, once you have your Vector W8
what is this?
unlocked,
Win by forfeit?
next up is getting in.
I haven't had one
which
of
is
those in
actually a little bit
forever.
complicated because you walk up to the door handle and you see like 2 little strips and nowhere to insert your hand. Well, it turns out you put your hand in the lower of the 2 strips and then pull up on the upper of the 2 strips. That's just like a normal door handle. And when you do that, then the door opens up. You have this very cool scissor door, as if you needed to make any more of a statement when pulling up somewhere than the styling of this car was already making. Now, next up, before I climb inside this car, I want to discuss one other interesting thing, and that would be the door latch. This car doesn't have a typical door latch like most cars, but instead you have this like metal piece that has a cylinder inside it, and the door is supposed to line up with that piece in order to lock and stay closed. Now, after 30 years, you would think these things would kind of get askew and there'd be a problem lining up the door, but it really isn't a problem at all. You go to close it, and it lines right up and it closes no problem right into that little metal cylinder. You can pretty much do it over and over again, and it lines up perfectly each time, at least on this Vector. Now, next up, it's time to climb into the Vector, and that's actually a pretty difficult task because of this enormously wide door sill. I will demonstrate how I get inside. First, you get your butt all the way in there if you can, then you swing over one leg and then the other, and then you're in. Okay, so now I'm inside the Vector W8, and it is time to go over the insanity of this interior, and I want to start with an explanation of why that door sill is so wide. And that's because the gear lever is there. That's right, you have the gear lever between the driver's seat and the driver's door, a feat that I'm not really sure is repeated in too many other cars. Now, you can see it sitting there in park, and like I mentioned, the Vector uses the old 3-speed automatic hydromatic transmission from General Motors, and it's operated in the same way. You have to pull up on the shift lever in order to engage each gear. Park, reverse, neutral, drive. You pull up on the lever, you pull back, and you go through them all. That's how you shift this car into gear. Now, truthfully, the owner of this car told me that the transmission is heavily modified from your standard General Motors 3-speed hydromatic, but nonetheless, the fact that it's based on that at all is pretty crazy. Almost as crazy as having the transmission lever between the driver's seat and the driver's door. But the door sill isn't wide only because of the gear lever. That isn't the only thing mounted over there. Another item over there is the mirror controls. Yes, this car has power mirrors, and the controls are mounted again to the left of the driver's seat between the driver's seat and the door sill. Now, the mirrors in this car are absolutely crazy. They're basically stuck onto the lower part of the windows in this aerodynamic shape, and they just look insane, especially from inside the car, but you can see pretty well out of them, and if you want to move them, you use this control, and yes, they still work. You can move around the power mirrors in a Vector using this little control next to your seat. It goes up, down, just like power mirrors in any other car. It's just a slightly different placement for them. Now, another contributing factor in that wide door sill is the power window switches, which are also mounted between the driver's door and the driver's seat. Now, the power window switches look like standard General Motors power window switches, but they control some truly insane windows. Take a look at these windows. The way this works apparently is if you press the button to open the power window, then this little middle piece in the window actually automatically retracts backwards in order to open up. It doesn't go down, it pulls backwards. Now, the reason I'm not demonstrating this for you, this is the one thing the owner of the car told me not to touch. He said everything else is fair game, but he's very worried that these might break, and obviously no replacement crazy middle Vector power window will ever exist again. Now, if you look closely at these windows, you can see the little seal that goes around the middle power bit that opens, and you can also see this little conduit running to the window that obviously contains the wires that open it up. Now, another interesting item over on the left between the driver's seat and the door, you have the ashtray and the cigarette lighter. You can open that up, and that's how you light your cigarette and where you put your ashes in the Vector. You also have a parking brake over here, but it's not just a regular parking brake, it's a very bizarre one. That's because it looks like a fairly normal parking brake until it curves. In order to conform to the space that it has to fit in, this parking brake is half normal in the boot area, and then half like tilted at a 45-degree angle on the handle area, which is so weird. but that's what they had to do in order to get the parking brake over there. And that's how it works. But by far the craziest thing, between the driver's seat and the driver door, you have these little buttons mounted above the gear selector that say 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, I always wondered, what are those? Those gears, but it only has a 3-speed, so why are there 4 buttons? I never understood.
The GT is halfway decent.
They control the screen. Ah, yes, the screen. There is a screen to the left of the steering wheel that apparently was legitimately taken out of a fighter jet. It was the same exact screen used in whatever fighter jet was happening at the time, or at least so says Jerry Weigert, who created Vector. Now, this screen is controlled with these 4 little buttons above the gear lever, and they all pull up a different type of screen. And yes, in this Vector, the screen is still working beautifully. Okay, so let's go through this. Now, you can see along the bottom, it describes what each screen does. And screen number 1, if you press button number 1, that would be the main screen that shows your typical main important items. For instance, over on the left, you have what gear you're currently in, P, R, N, D, L, and yes, this does work in real time. As you move the gear selector, it correspondingly moves on this screen to let you know if you're in park, reverse, neutral, drive. That is really, really impressive to see on an old school screen like this. Now, also on that number 1 screen, or the main screen, it shows you your current fuel level. It also shows you your current speed. And yes, again, this updates in real time. As you drive along, you can see it lets you know what speed you're going and updates how fast you're going. This is the
definitely
speedometer.
You have to go that one side to get that
one.
one.
This is how it works on this number 1 main screen as you
crossfire.
drive along. Same deal with RPMs. Again, this updates in real time as you drive along. Accelerate, slow down.
Here.
Your RPMs change, and the change is shown on this screen. Now, this screen also shows a couple of other pieces of information, specifically your current odometer reading and also the current time. Now, you move on to screen number 2 by pressing the little 2 button above the gear lever, and this is the performance screen.
Sometimes it works.
And it shows various different car functions. For example, your engine temperature, your oil pressure, and various other different car items you might want to see in a performance setting to kind of let you know how all of your vehicle systems are doing. Now, interestingly, if you press button number 3, that also is a performance screen. It shows a couple of transmission items like transmission temperature. It also shows battery voltage. Again, always updated in real time, so you know exactly what's going on with your Vector on that screen. And finally, if you press button number 4, that pulls up a screen that Vector calls your chassis screen. Although that is a fairly optimistic description, because what it actually shows is like this side profile picture of your Vector, and then it lets you know if anything is open, like your engine cover, your cargo area cover, or your door. And yes, again, it updates in real time. You can see if I close the door, then it shows on the screen that the door has been closed. And again, if I open the door, it shows on the screen that the door has been opened. Updating the screen in real time, that is just one of the coolest things to see. And next up, speaking of opening things, and specifically opening the door in the Vector, here's how you do it. You reach over to the door panel, and there's a little door latch. You pull on that and then kind of push it up, and the door will do the rest. And that's how you open the scissor door from the inside of the Vector W8. And next up, time to move on to the rest of the interior and all of the other Vector in-cabin craziness. And I want to start with just sort of a general overview. Like I mentioned before, they called it Vector Aeromotive, and it was trying to sort of resemble a fighter plane and a car at the same time. And so that's why the interior looks like a cockpit. You have buttons styled like an airplane would have. You have that screen that I already showed you. And if you just take a general look around this interior, you will see the aircraft design influence on this interior, especially the aircraft from the 1980s. And that is very true if we start looking at all these buttons and switches. We will start over on the left of everything where you have the light controls. You can see you have controls for the headlights, parking lights, fog lights.
Not even worth it.
All
Just
of the headlight controls are over there. Instead of just being on a simple little dial, they each have their own individual button, which I guess helps the aircraft look.
It's early in the
you
season
also have a button there marked INT, and that's for interior lights. You press that, and yes, the interior lights still turn on, at least in this Vector, to let you read a map or whatever while you're driving or riding in your Vector.
Sorry, guys.
You also have the hazard light switch below that. You can press that, and that will turn on the hazard lights. Now, next, moving over to the second
There
row
are
of
bots that are
buttons
like
and dials
penetrating,
here, two especially
pen
stand
testing,
out. One
penetration
says panel,
testing
and there's a
the
little
box,
dial
right?
BRT
So, like,
and
the-
dim. That is the panel
like what's on
brightness.
the left and
you move
right,
that up or down,
right?
and it instantly
So, like, you
dims
could-
or brightens your
can
entire
we hit those
cockpit
planes?
light
Is that a
instrument panel
possibility?
here, and
Can we
obviously
do
it
that
works
on a
pretty
ramp?
well. Now, you
Every
also have
single car at
display
max,
BRT
you know?
and dim, and I assume
That's what
that was
they're
a
doing.
brightness dial for the display
so
screen.
early.
But unlike the panel dial, the display dial doesn't seem to be working at all. You move it up or down, nothing happens. The display stays the same level of brightness. Now, the buttons that I really like in this row are the cruise control buttons. First, it's impressive that this car has cruise control at all. No other exotic sports cars from this era did, but
Welcome,
the
new
Vector was
viewers.
ahead of
Make
its
sure
time in
you're,
some impressive
following.
ways, and cruise control was one of
'Cause
them. But
I
the
don't know
buttons
when
are
I go
ridiculous.
on.
Instead
So
of a
if you're
very
thinking
simple
that
little
like
turn
Sunday
signal
night
stock
is
or
all the
steering wheel
time,
control,
you
you
can
had
hang out with me at
4
9:30 on a Sunday
square
Pacific
buttons.
time.
One said enable,
Yeah,
and
maybe.
there was
I don't know.
engage
Sometimes it's
down,
like 6 in the
engage
morning
up,
Monday.
and inhibit.
I'm
Enable
trying to
would
go
turn it
every
on,
single
inhibit
day,
would
so
turn it
at least
off.
we have
But
that
instead of saying on or off,
together.
enable
you know.
and inhibit, again, I guess to feel like a fighter plane with the language used on those buttons. Now, next you move over from that row of buttons, and you have the buttons and dials you see below the fighter jet style screen. One of them says HUD, bright, dim, and off, for a heads-up display. Only problem is this car didn't have a heads-up display. I think Vector was hoping they would add one later,
Yeah,
and obviously it never
that
came to
sounds like it,
fruition.
Doug.
But that dial is in here, even though it apparently controls absolutely nothing. Now, next to the heads-up display dial, you have a dial labeled boost, and you can see min and max, and you can adjust it. You have adjustable boost from the factory in this car. Now, one of the big selling points of the Vector at the time was intended to be the fact that it used a fairly large engine that wasn't very stressed. Unlike the Ferrari F40 with its small turbo V8 and various other supercars at the time, and so they actually let you turn up the boost depending on how fast you wanted to go, because the thinking was it probably wouldn't
off the
harm
walls
this
in
large
Paris.
engine and its internals. That is a pretty impressive thing. You won't see that on too many cars.
Yeah, look
Now,
at the
next to the
speed
boost
that
dial, you
happens
can
when
see
I
there's
hit the
another little
wall.
panel of buttons
Move
in
from
here.
200 to, like,
These actually
160.
aren't buttons. It turns out these are warning lights. You can see you have low coolant, you have the brake warning light, fan in-op, low oil,
So you
whatever,
get trashed.
to let you know if something is wrong in your Vector motoring experience. Now, next to that little panel of warning lights, you have a really unusual one.
Sup,
Engine
Nintendo
hours.
Switch version
This
of Asphalt
gauge
9 got the
shows how
Clash
many
update.
hours the engine has been operated.
Fuck
it has
yeah.
an odometer, like I showed you in
You guys
the
wanna
screen,
see the
but
Clash?
it also
The Clash
has
is-
an hours gauge,
this is what
like
you
an
get. You get
airplane.
access
Again, trying to drive home that
cool,
point that
cool
this
shit
was an
here. Let's see.
aeromotive company instead of an automotive company.
Oh, I don't have
you
the
don't
Clash
see too many engine hours
update here.
gauges.
Well, I don't.
in
I have
cars.
it. I just don't.
Now, next
we're
to the
not-
engine hours
they're
gauge,
not-
you
there's
have
not
this
a
little
season.
panel to the left of the
So I don't know
steering
what that
wheel
means. What
that
should
has
I
a
reset
bunch of
here?
different,
Let's see.
what looks like buttons on them. It turns out this is actually like the fuse panel circuits, and if something gets tripped, you're supposed to, I guess, push it, and then that will reset
The Switch
it.
version
so, for instance,
is
if the audio
is
circuit
very,
gets tripped,
very
you can
different,
press audio,
you know,
that will
because
reset
Nintendo
it
doesn't
and get
allow
your stereo back
microtransactions,
working again.
so,
I think this may also be sort of derivative of an airplane. Very
like even the
unusual to see in a
multiplayer kit,
car,
right? Like
but
this little
that
thing,
is what
it's
that was
$6.99.
intended to be used for. Now, next, moving on
you
from
guys
there,
can't
we
get
have
that.
to cover the steering wheel. There are a few
weird.
interesting items here. Over to the left, you have two stalks coming off the steering wheel. One is the tilt stalk. You pull that and then you can move the wheel up or down for better comfort. Now, the other stalk coming off the steering column, fairly standard. This is your turn signal stalk, and it also controls the
Let's
windshield
go!
wipers. Nothing particularly unusual here, except for the fact that this is just a regular old General Motors stock. Again,
Genty.
pulled off some regular General Motors vehicle from
Let's
the 80s and placed on one of the
go.
most exclusive supercars ever. Very unusual. Now, next we move on to the steering wheel, and I love this steering wheel because it looks like a steering wheel from a bumper car you would see at an amusement park. You have a normal sort of wheel rim, but then in the middle it's padded like you would do at an amusement park to prevent like a 10-year-old from getting injured when they're driving on the bumper cars. I think that is hilarious. Now, one interesting
Salem,
thing
I
about
would
this
I
wheel,
would say though
over
with
in
the
that
with the
little bank
with
of
with
warning
the
lights, there is
Switch
an airbag
is that
light.
the paths
So is there
and the
an
tracks
airbag in
and
the
the
steering wheel? That
cars
would be
and the
impressive.
strength
No other
and
exotic
their
cars had that.
abilities and
Very
all
few
that
other
is
any
all
cars
the
had that
same across
back
all
in
the platforms. So
1990.
Which
This
is
car
great,
might
you
have
know,
an
so you
airbag,
can,
but
like,
not hard to find information
see us
about
all
that sort of
use the
thing. Maybe
Vanda
they just
during
put
the
that light in
Paris
there thinking
season,
they
and
would
then
have an
it's
airbag
like,
later.
oh my
But either
gosh,
way,
okay, the
kind of
Vanda's
an
the
unusual
track to
steering wheel.
use
Now,
once
next up, over
the
to the
Switch
right of
gets
the steering wheel, apparently
Paris,
there used to be a
right?
little
That's
stalk
cool.
coming off here for the
You guys are
horn.
getting, like, a
I
couple
guess that
month
broke off.
advance.
You also have the ignition,
nice.
and again, this is a regular General
So the
Motors
Vanda is
ignition
like
switch from this
the
era.
OP car
Not
in
surprising
Paris
given
for some
the key,
reason.
but it's kind of funny to see. To the right of the steering wheel, you also have
I mean, I'm not a great,
compass,
I'm
which
not
is
the
a little
best
bit
player in the
unusual,
world.
especially to see a compass like this instead of a digital display like modern
the
cars
Genty
have.
doesn't
But
flip
again,
right.
this is the
Nobody
airplane
flips
thing,
right on
once
the
again, in
ramps,
this
and I think
interior, just
except
kind of
the
prove
Vanda.
how
And I think
aircraft
that it's the
focused
ramp.
the Vector
It's the
was.
keeping
Now,
the
next
speed,
to the
so,
compass, you
like,
have
look
the
at the speed in the
stereo, which
upper
is actually
right
kind of
when I
impressive.
jump over all these
Obviously, there are a
ramps,
ton
right?
of buttons on here, but it's just a regular Sony head
Like,
unit.
I'm
The
not even
impressive
touching
part
anything,
is,
right? I'm just
for
gonna
a
go over regular.
CD changer.
Like, that's
Most cars
dumb.
in 1990 didn't have a CD player. This
It's
thing had
just
a
the ramps are
10-disc
too
CD
shallow.
changer. And that CD changer
my
was over
personal
on the
opinion.
passenger side of the dashboard. You could just load CDs in right there, as opposed to going into the trunk like a lot of cars from this era. Now, the drawback, of course, was
See,
that
it
meant there
flips
was
normal
no
on that one. So
passenger
it's not- it's a
airbag.
game
Instead,
design thing.
You got
You know,
entertainment
they'll figure it
and
out. They
music,
did that.
which
They've
I guess
done it
was
with
a
every single
trade-off that
track.
people were making
They've
back when this car came
they've
out.
hot fixed.
Now, next up, below the stereo
You know,
head unit and controls, you can see
dumb
there's a
stuff,
little area
you know,
for
which
climate
are
controls.
down.
This car has air conditioning in this
two-step.
little panel with buttons, lets you adjust the air conditioning, and I would
Right.
say it is
The
surprisingly
refill timers
good. It
on
blows
Switch are
cold, it
insane,
blows
right?
well.
It's like
good air
you go
conditioning,
get
especially for an
you go
exotic
poop
car
and you're
of
back
this
and
era. Now, if you turn on the air conditioning, it blows
yeah,
through
it's
4
nice.
separate
My
climate
son has a
vents,
Switch,
which are kind of
or a Switch.
small. There's one
And
on
we've
the
tried
driver's
it.
side
It's
A-pillar,
okay.
There's 2 in
Well,
the middle
it's
next
just
to
not the
climate
same,
controls,
you know?
and then there's another
It's
one on the
there's something
passenger
about
side
playing
A-pillar. They're
internationally
these small
across
little vents, but you
a
can
Windows
move
platform
around
that,
through
like,
these
you
little
know everyone
circles
has
and
access
position
to,
the air wherever
even, like,
you
really
want,
shitty
and you
computers. I
can
mean, like, I
change
have-
the climate controls using this
I have
little
computers from
climate control panel. And that's how the
2013
AC and heat
still
comes
running this
out
game.
in the
Easy.
Vector. Now, speaking of the climate controls and that climate vent over on the passenger side, let's discuss some of the other interesting.
Oh, yeah, we've been
occurrences
playing the
over on
Clash
passenger
forever.
side of the
In
Vector.
fact,
one is the fact that the passenger
it's a point of
had
contention
their
among many
ashtray
players
and
because
cigarette
it's a lot of
lighter. So in
work
this
and
tiny little
the
car, this tiny
algorithm
little
or
cabin,
whatever
you had
the
2
team
ashtrays
leader
and
that
2
runs the
cigarette
Clash
lighters so that driver and
sees
passenger didn't
versus
have
what
to
we
share.
see.
It
And
was
so
a
we
different
see
time.
things, and then the
next up,
points,
let's talk
it's
about
like,
the seats
it'll
in
say,
this car,
oh, hey,
which are rather
play
interesting in
with
themselves. First off, they're
a,
these fairly well-bolstered
play with
seats. I
a
actually find them to be
C-class,
surprisingly comfortable. This was an American supercar built for
a
Americans,
C-class
rather larger than maybe
McLaren,
Italians from
right?
the
So you're
80s.
thinking,
And that's
okay, the
clear with
GT,
seats.
right?
They're not
So
too
I have a
grippy
gold
or too
GT, no
small.
problem, I'll play
They're
that.
relatively
But there's
comfortable. Now, the
also
seats have some
B-class
interesting
available, right?
controls to them. They're mounted
So I
in
have
the
like an
middle
F1
on
LM.
this panel that for some reason says classic.
Which could make that track in like
cursive.
half the
Maybe it
time.
was the company that
Which is
made the seat
stupid because,
controls. Either way, it looks very
like,
out of
why
place.
would you make the
Oh,
bonus
you wanna
points
change the seat? Oh, go
on
down
a
to the
lower class
classic.
car that will never,
And that's
ever,
how
ever
you
get you the
do it.
time
Now,
bonus?
this little classic
So are the
panel has
points
several
the
different
fucking
controls,
value?
one of which
Or
to
is it
turn on the
or is it the
heated
time?
seats.
And
This car
nobody
has
ever
heated
seems to
seats,
fucking
driver
know. And even
and
the
passenger,
like
which would have been very
Asphalt 9
forward for a
people like got banned from the
1990s
fucking
supercar.
Discord for
But this
asking
car
about
also has
like why it's so
5 other
stupid
buttons and
and
switches
why
on
it's
this
such a
little
difficult
panel.
thing and why
One
it
of
can't
the
be a little
switches
bit more
moves the
clear
seat back
to the people who are
automatically. You
fucking
press
playing
the
the
switch and
Clash,
seat goes
right?
backward and
Like,
forward,
oh,
depending on how you
I had
press.
no
Another
idea
one
that
is the
like
lumbar
one of
support. Again, you
these
press that
is
little
like
switch and the lumbar
worth
will sort
more
of
than one of
inflate
these,
to give you
right?
more support,
Or
press
oh,
it the
there's
other
one of
direction
these
and it will
though,
deflate.
which is
And
like
then
an
finally you
in
have
and then
these
out, and then
3
it
black
separates
square
down here, which is
buttons.
not the
These are
same as like
unlabeled. Initially, I
one
thought
that
it was
has,
seat
you know,
memory,
fuck
but
that
that
noise,
is
dude.
not the case.
I'm not
Instead, if you
playing that
press it,
game.
it does,
Sorry,
like,
Steve.
little things.
Like,
Maybe it
I know you
changes
love
the
it.
bolsters
If
a
you're
little
watching,
bit, or the
like,
backrest or
I'm
something,
over
but
it.
it has
You know,
small
thank you for putting me in
effects on the
TM so I
seating
can just
position
fucking
itself.
play
Now, one
for rep.
interesting thing,
That's
these
great.
seats are manual forward and
extra-
back. So despite all of these power controls and the fact
extra
that they're
vibe.
heated, you still had to pull a lever and throw your weight if you actually wanted to move the seats
Yes. Yes, the Alfieri. Look, man, you were never gonna go wrong with an Alfieri that's maxed. It'll work for.
There is no
what is that in C class?
Console
Yeah,
or
that'll be
center
great.
divider between the
And
driver
it's a good
passenger
MP
seat.
car for sure.
It's just one sort of open cockpit cabin area.
But like
The
once you
weirdest
get like
thing that
a
results from this
Viper
is the fact that the
ACR
driver and passenger
or
share
H2 Speed
a
maxed.
footwell area. There's only
that's
one,
how that's
and
your
that
C
means the
class.
passenger has
And then the
access
Stingray's
to
great.
the pedals over
What
on
else
the
is good
driver's
in
side.
C
So if the
class?
passenger places their foot in the wrong place,
Like,
they might accidentally
resist the
hit
temptation of using the
accelerator
Venture
pedal or even
Sarth,
the brake
ever.
if they go far
Like,
enough.
ever.
Very, very
So, like, if you
unusually,
can
never
not
see
use the
that,
Venture
but
Sarth
that's how it is in the Vector.
and choose a
another
different
interesting item
vehicle
in the
for
Vector,
any
that would be
task.
the seat belts. This car uses
I think
General
that's-
Motors
this
seat
car
belts.
is so
Not much of a
terrible.
surprise, but The buckle of General Motors seatbelts from this area said GM.
The
on it.
aperta
Vector
is not
couldn't
going to
have
happen
that,
on
so
this.
instead,
So
they placed this little
I need the
red
wrap, so I'm gonna
square
let it
on
run.
top of the
And
GM
I
logo.
gotta go
I bet
pee.
if you peeled that back, it would say GM on this seatbelt, but instead putting that red
And you can watch
square there
Doug.
gives it the
Doug's
appearance
amazing
of a
review of the
traditional
W8, which
seatbelt
should be in
eject
this game,
button.
by the
Now,
way.
another interesting item
This
in this
is a
interior,
great
the fact
time
that
to
there's
put the,
no center
like,
console means that
classic
there's no
weirdos.
center console storage, but this car does have
like a
a
weirdo
glove
season.
box, which is surprising for exotic cars of this era. Interestingly, it is fairly large. And two other interesting interior items, this time on the ceiling. One is the fact that, as you can see, you have a large glass sunroof here. This is a pop-out sunroof panel. There's no cover for it, so you were just left to kind of roast in the sun if you wanted to drive this. Fortunately, like I mentioned, there is very good air conditioning, but all the Vectors came this way with the pop-out sunroof panel. You also have a regular old interior rear view mirror here, although if you look into it, you can see the visibility not so good. The rear window is really small and you can't see much back there, but you do have a mirror. Now, if you're wondering why visibility to the back was so bad, the answer is because it looks like this. This is the rear end design of this car, and it is truly the craziest thing you will ever see. If you get up behind one of these in traffic, you will really wonder if you're looking at a spaceship that has just landed. You have all of these horizontal lines going across the back of the car like only an 80s car could possibly have. The rear window is completely contained within these top three lines, and then you have these horizontal lines on the engine compartment, on the spoiler, and then there's another set of horizontal lines in the very far back over the rear lights. Now you can see when the car is turned on, this is where the brake lights are located. They're sort of around these little horizontal lines in the back. And when you turn on the turn signals in this car, you can see the brake lights become the turn signals in back. Here's this car with the hazard lights on, and you can clearly see the brake lights have become the rear turn signals. They're not a separate turn signal unit in the back. But this is your general rear overview of the Vector W8 with these unbelievable horizontal lines in back. But before I move on from the back of the Vector, there's a couple of other interesting things I want to mention. One of which is right here. You have this rear grille, and mounted on it is the words twin turbo. Doesn't say Vector, doesn't say W8, just twin turbo, and it isn't centered. It's on a panel in the center, but twin turbo is kind of over off to the side for some unusual reason. Now below that you have the reverse lights, these little white lights on either side. They come on obviously when the car is in reverse, and those are the reverse lights in the Vector W8. Probably my favorite thing back here, aside from the craziness and the overall styling, is the license plate, which was clearly an afterthought. They had obviously designed this car, and then somebody was like, you know, you gotta put a license plate on here, and they were like, oh, crap. So the license plate is stuck off in the corner over by the exhaust. Just ridiculous to stick it over there. Clearly indicating that it was not part of the original design process for this car. Now next up, moving on to the side of the W8, there are quite a few interesting items worth noting.
Intolerable. Intolerable. We've got to go to live.
Over here, I want to start with opening the stuff back here. There are two latches located in the door jamb on the driver's side. You can see there's one on the top, one on the bottom. There's a little keyhole. You can lock them both if you want. Now, if you pull on the lower of the two latches, that pops open the engine cover. You pull it, and then the cover opens up automatically, which is actually pretty nice because then you don't have to go back there and unlatch anything while it's hot and running.
Oh, Doug Johnson.
Here,
Hold on.
See the engine. Like
Let me reset this. I think it's a YouTube.
On the bottom, there's a little keyhole. You can lock them both if you want. Now, if you pull on the lower of the two latches, that pops open the engine cover. You pull it, and then the cover opens up automatically, which is actually pretty nice because then you don't have to go back there and unlatch anything while it's hot and running if there's some problem. And if you look in here, you can see the engine. Like I mentioned, a General Motors V8 modified to 6 liters.
Yeah, Salem, keep it up, man.
Turbochargers, and you can see how they've stuck it in here. This is a very impressive thing, although not quite as exotic looking as some of the other engines in exotic cars from the era.
All right, let's Vanda this up. Let's see.
The Lamborghini Countach, obviously because this wasn't designed by the Italians with some glorious V12. Nonetheless, this isn't a view you get very often. The Vector's 8-cylinder engine. Now, the other latch back here opens up the trunk. There's actually a small cargo area behind the engine compartment. You pull on this latch, and that unlatches the cargo area. You open it up, and you can see, well, calling it a cargo area is generous. It's very wide and very small, but you can get stuff in there if you want. Like, for instance, 2 baseball bats, maybe 3 golf clubs, a ski. Now, next up, I want to move on to some other interesting items on the side of the Vector. I mentioned earlier that in back, there's no badging except for that twin turbo badge. Interestingly, it's the same deal in front. This car has no badge on its nose to let you know what it is, unlike basically every other car ever. The only real badging on the outside of this car is below the doors. It has this huge badge that says Vector W8 Twin Turbo. It is absolutely massive. I guess it makes up for the fact that there are no other emblems anywhere else on the car. You have one on the driver's side and one over on the passenger side. This is just one of the coolest car badges in the industry. I would love to just take this off and stick it up on my wall. I think that is so cool, and someone should put that back into production. But it is weird for a car that took a long time to get to market, a lot of hard work from the company that made it, that it doesn't have any other badges anywhere else. And next up, moving on to a couple of other interesting things on the side of the car. One is the fuel door, which works in kind of an unusual way. You pull out this little tab, and then you twist it to the left to open the fuel door. You can also twist it to the right to close the fuel door, and of course there's a keyhole there, so you can lock it and prevent people from stealing fuel out of your Vector. And the most interesting thing to me about the fuel door is the fact that on the bottom it says blank U.S.
Watch
gallons.
the game and get limited ads,
yeah. Whatever the fuel door was going on was supposed to write how many U.S. gallons this vehicle could take. Vector, of course, did not do that, so instead it is still blank. Now, the other interesting thing on the outside of this car is
okay, let's do this. Let's do 5 of these.
And they're interesting because this car
join
has
me.
Here is
Spagna,
another set of
GTA,
wheels in the owner's garage. There's a reason for this. When the owner of this car bought it, it had the standard stock original wheels on it, and in back it was a 315 width for a 16-inch wheel. And nobody made that size. The owner of this car got in touch with the original chief engineer from this car from 30 years ago, and that guy made him a new set of wheels, except now 18 inches in size. And then it was possible to find a new tire in order to stick on his Vector. So these are not the original wheels, but they look basically identical in
cool, though.
style
They
to
look
the original
better.
wheels. They just happen to be 2 inches bigger, so you could fit a modern, rational, normal tire on it. Personally, I just like the fact that the original chief engineer for this car is still around, and if you call him up, he'll make you a new set of Vector wheels.
That hitbox shouldn't be there.
Presumably,
That's fucking dumb.
And next up, moving further down the side of the Vector, here you can see a couple more interesting items. One, you can now see the mirrors from the outside, and you can see how they were sort of integrated into the aerodynamics of the car. Often mirrors are sort of stuck on there and they screw with everything, but these almost look like they were intended to be part of the design from day
90% of everything I do is rep earning.
You can now easily see from
because
this
that's how you
angle
really
just
get the big bonuses.
The windows in this car are. You don't just have this cool window that slides open with the power window button, but you can also see the windows
These are way shorter races
in
too.
the middle. You have a flat plane and then they make a turn and go in a different direction down the door. This is a really, really unusual window design, and I would not want to be responsible for breaking one of these windows because I suspect you will never find a replacement. Now next we move further forward in the Vector, and from this angle you can see one of its very craziest details. I'm talking about the windshield wipers and the fact that there are 3 of them. This car
Hey,
has
Salem,
1
how's the
windshield,
quality on
2
everything?
seats,
Just
3
let me know.
windshield wipers.
I know we've had
2 on
trouble with
side
the
by the
YouTube.
A-pillar,
That's
and
my
1
internet
in the
here.
middle.
I have good
Absolutely
upload, just
ridiculous.
terrible downloads.
You will not see this
like
on any
a weird
other
thing
car.
to have.
And if you've ever wanted to know
So,
how
but
the
like
3
audio
windshield
and like, is the
wipers
game
in the
sound
Vector
good
operate,
versus
well,
Doug
here you
versus
go.
me versus the background bullshit that's happening, like it's raining and you might hear it from the skylight.
Now, next up, we move on to the front
hear it
end in the
raining,
Vector, and
or
from
like
your
the
angle, you
heater
can
turning
see just how
on, or
crazy
anything
this
like
car
that.
looks from
Yeah,
the
just let me know.
front, how flat and low and wide this particular perspective is. It really is unbelievable to see
No
this
quality
on a
pixelating?
car,
What
but
does that
I will
mean?
cover the styling in a little bit more depth
So it
shortly.
is
What I
pixelating
want to talk
or it
about here in
isn't?
the front are 2 other interesting quirks of the Vector, starting with the headlights. Now you can see in this position they are closed. A lot of cars from this era had pop-up
I have 2
headlights,
different internets.
but not the Vector. Instead, you turn on the headlights with that button.
I have
in the interior, and then
I
the covers
have
pop
DSL
down.
and I have cable.
Take a look at that.
And
again.
so
You can
I
see that the covers kind of
stream
go down
up
into the body of
into
the
the-
car,
into the
and then
internet, into the
lights are
cloud
on, and that's how
with
the
my DSL,
pop-down
and then I
headlights
stream
work in
back.
the Vector. Now, obviously, if you turn the headlights off,
It
the
looks
opposite
crystal
happens.
clear
The
for
lights
me.
turn off, and then the
So
covers
you let me know.
go back up and go
It
back
isn't
into this
crystal
position
clear.
where they're
Okay.
covering the headlights for a more aerodynamic look.
Right.
Now,
Are
another
you
interesting item in the
watching
front
on
of the
mobile
Vector
only?
is this panel
That might be
here,
something.
which is unusually flimsy. All right, to open this panel,
And I can
there's
always
a little lever that you
reduce-
pull
I
in
can
the
reduce
driver's
the-
footwell way down in there,
the
and then
bit
it
rate.
opens
Right
to
now
this
I'm-
point. Then there's a little latch you pull
hitting all the-
here, and then
Except for the keyframe interval.
you can kind of open this up.
If you're,
But as you can
I
see,
meant the quality thing. It
it's
isn't.
oddly flimsy. When I open it, it feels like it could pop off at any second. It's
So
a very
rate the
unusual
stream.
thing
So
because
10
obviously
out of
this car is
10
designed for
would
high
be
speeds,
like
and you expect everything to be
it's
completely
crystal.
stuck down in
When
place.
you can see
But this
now
panel
in this
certainly
window
is
where
not
Doug
more
is,
flimsy than
okay,
you
this is
think.
all
Now, up
download.
front
It
here
could
you
be
have 2
bullshit, and
things.
that's
You have
all
a fan,
YouTube,
which a lot
right?
of
So if
exotic
it's
cars
shitty
have,
quality here in
cooling,
this
obviously.
window where I
And
have
you
my
another
mouse,
storage compartment, which
right
is
here in
actually
Doug's
pretty good.
window,
Most exotic
over there.
cars that have a rear storage
that's
compartment
fine.
figure, well, we've gone
But
far enough, and they don't bother trying to
if you
integrate
are
one into the
seeing-
front. But Vector did, and this is actually a pretty deep additional storage
Like, it should
compartment
be
for extra practicality. Now,
maybe
once you put
pixelated
your
in the
thing back
corner,
here,
right? So like when you
close
see
this flimsy
when we're going
panel
super
once
fast,
again,
like 200 plus miles an
slap it
hour,
down in place.
so you might
and
see some
then you're good to
pixelation on
go.
the outside.
And one other interesting item worth noting up front, again, lighting
10 on
related. I already
everything.
showed you
Okay,
the headlights,
okay,
but you might be
okay.
wondering,
So
where
it is
exactly
good.
are the
So everything
turn
is
signals,
good.
Since you clearly can't see them from your
Give me a
angle.
thumbs up
The
if it's
answer is
fucking
they're
great.
Under here, the furthest frontmost
If it's a
part of the
crystal
car,
clear
sort of integrated into what I guess
A9
would be the
stream, because
bumper.
that's really what
where
I
you have
want
the
to
turn
do. I
signals.
want
You
to
can
push
see with the
this to
hazard
the
lights on,
limit. I
probably
want to
not
make
the
sure that
most
you can
visible
see
turn
as
signals in the world, but
clear
hey,
as I see at
at least it has
1440p.
them.
Now I'm
And
down
next
resing
up,
like
another
I told
interesting
Pringles the
Vector
other
item, that
day.
would be
I'm down
right
resing
here, this
1440 to
label in the
1080.
driver's
So
door
you're gonna
jamb.
see it
This
a
is the
little
label that
soft.
says this vehicle conforms
I was
to
on
all
mobile, I
applicable
would
federal
give
motor
emoji.
vehicle
Okay.
standards.
Cool.
Basically,
All right.
the label that says this car is
Fantastic.
certified
Good.
for sale.
That's the
to
key. The
public.
key
It
is
must
really
have
just to
been
test this
a
equipment
crazy
to prove to my
celebration at
clients
Vector when
that
the
are
government
actually
told them they
paying,
were okay
not-
to put this label
You know, and I
on
could
this
do
car.
this
It's a
'cause
pretty
I'm
big
doing
deal.
this
And
anyway, you
frankly,
know, and I
I
can hang
think
out with you
Vector
guys
did a
instead
pretty
of-
fantastic job
So I
with
can
that
test
whole
all this great
car
equipment.
and jet fighter plane mashup.
Like, this is
because
way
for our
overkill.
last
So
quirk
when you
and
see
feature of the
quality,
Vector,
like, I mean,
we
it
have
should
to
be
talk about
quality,
its
and if it
design.
isn't,
And I think this car looks most insane
then there's a
next
problem.
to a normal car. This is a normal,
And I
boring,
need to know about it,
mid-size
and I need to
luxury
know why,
crossover, the kind
right?
you
So
see
if you're like
in
not
massive
seeing it, oh,
numbers
you're on
the streets of
Wi-Fi, you're on
wherever you
5G,
live.
because
And
another
this is the
Twitter
Vector.
or
Now, the
Twitch,
Vector looks pretty crazy
when
by
I
itself,
send,
but
I'm
when you
sending a
put it
60
next to
frames
a
per
car
second feed,
that is
right?
rational,
So on Twitch,
you realize
sometimes
just
on
how
certain
crazy
platforms,
this looks.
T-Mobile,
The Lamborghini Countach
which is my platform,
is a crazy-looking
unfortunately,
car.
it
The
will
Vector
just black
clearly
out your
is
stream.
crazier. And here's the thing,
And
it
you
doesn't
won't,
matter what angle
it'll
you
just be
stage
black.
this
It'll be a play
comparison
button
from,
and a pause
the
button.
Vector always
It'll
looks
just be
like
black,
it is
and
from
like
a
everybody will be like, "What the
completely
fuck's going on?"
different planet.
The second they
Countach,
put
the
like they
Diablo,
go
they're
to
insane, but they
Starbucks,
still look
and the
like
Starbucks could
cars.
have like
This
shittier
thing
internet
just
than like the
doesn't. It
5G
really
Ultra
is was
or whatever that T-Mobile has, and those fuckers will, like Twitch will just release all of the bandwidth. Like it's like, oh, all of a sudden, oh, you're in the Starbucks on Wi-Fi. Oh, we'll use your T-Mobile, whatever.
But
I'm over
have
it.
to stop there. This car is so
I'm over
insane
it.
that this
Anyway,
video has run
we're trying to do this. This is like, we're purposely trying to do this on under 30 megabits per second, which is 30, what's 30 divided by 8?
But I didn't want to cut anything out. I did drive the Vector W8, and I'm going to show you my driving experience and the Doug score tomorrow on my second channel, More Doug Nero. And when that video goes live, I will link it in the description below this video.
240 mega. So I could do two or three decent big feeds, which is that's kind of what I'm hoping, right? So I could feed you guys. This is what I call an 8 megabits per second feed. I don't want to watch this one. 8 megabits per second is incredible. So like if you were watching like an illegal stream of the Super Bowl,
is a
the fastest or best that
Jaguar XJ
would have been like 6,000. Let's do this race first. Why is the engine noise not around? And also, I'm using an ATEM outside, so there's no computer, actually. The only computer that's involved is the computer that's playing the game, obviously, and the computer that's doing the graphics is the same computer that's doing the... So the little inset photo, or the inset downstream key is what it's called. So that's why it's Luma keyed out. So sometimes you'll see some weird blackness. It's just like see-through black. So that corner plus the chat is all on, and you'll see a follower thing once I become important. Once Mitch Dodge starts up again, Mitch has like 600 followers. And then we can throw the Music is for Lovers brand behind it, which we just got 4,000 on YouTube. So if you're not following on YouTube, find Music is the number 4, right? 4 Lovers. Music is for Lovers. And you'll see about 4,000 followers. It's a pink elephant, and you know you're in the right place. So all of that media, all of it, almost. I mean, I would say there's probably maybe a half a dozen videos that aren't mine or something that I contracted. So here, I'll play a sample. Mihai Popoviciu. This guy's from Romania. Let's start way back. So I use this multi-camera rig, not this, but I used to use these kind of cameras, right? This one's a Sony. But if you get you can get a bunch of these Sonys, and these ATEM, these little ATEMs, they're like, I'm not gonna move it for fear that I lose the stream. But anyway, they're like $300 US, you know. Anyway, this guy's fucking incredible, and it's perfect for 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday. You use Logitech. You have a 920C. Those are incredible. I still use those. The 920C Logitechs are one of the best webcams, period. And what's fucked up is that the Logitech software and all that stuff. So Salem, if you have a 920C, the abilities that the OBS software, OBS Studio, like the regular OG, like free, you can get whatever, the one that I use right now for everything. If you get that, and here, like, this is what I do for OBS, right? So I'm going to move this. Hopefully I have enough time. So I can move this down a little bit, right? To make sure it's open. Anyway, you got to get that. You just got to ignore the Logitech software and use OBS Studio to modify your OBS camera. Then use the virtual camera in OBS virtual camera to then zoom or do whatever you need to do for work or school. Piece of cake. Look at that rail slide. That was nice. It also means that I'm going to lose this race. I think it's an older. Yeah, the 920C is old. I mean, I want to say 2017. So look at the bottom. Just lift it up. Look at, is it one that flips on the back of the monitor? On the side, it's got a weird like little flibbity. If that's the thing, then man, you're golden. I don't think Logitech made a bad camera, to be perfectly honest. So Mihai, I had Mark. Mark is running a wireless gimbal, which is like a Ronin S with a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K on the top. So, but he doesn't work until later on that night. So right now, this is very early in the evening. I would say, how long is this set? Is it old? It's a long one, huh? Yeah, 2.5 hours. So this would have been, and Mihai was a Thursday, so he would have started at 11 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 2. Yeah, right. So he would have started at 11 and been done at, but yeah. Yes, it's like that with the bottom part and the camera top part. Great. All right, so look at the model number. What's the model number? And just put it in the chat. And I'll look it up and I'll tell you how to mod it to make it work its best. Logitech only made a few cameras and they're all amazing. If it's a 900, 800, 700 series, you're golden. Hold on, I gotta turn off my YouTube because fucking